The idea here is to really get some tips from Steve, from Pierre, Michael, Yuling, about what are the characteristics of an outstanding proposal, maybe what are some of the pitfalls. We're going to do this partly as a panel. I'll kick off with some questions, but you should also feel free very much to come in. We're going to have some back and forth. I don't think you guys have any long speeches or pre-prepared remarks, right? So it's really just, what are some common things that you see? What advice do you have for folks in terms of proposal writing? What are the commonest things that you see that make good proposals go down? Because we just take for granted that all the ideas here are good. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten here. We had over 200 letters of intent on diagnostics, of which we selected 24. We know that the Grand Challenge Exploration Phase 1 process is very selective. So the issue, as Carly said, and you see what I mean about young people, eh? The issue is, as Carly said, is not about ideas here. It's really about the expression of ideas and how to optimize the expression of your ideas for winning proposals. There may be some sharpening of the ideas, but primarily this is about the optimal presentation of your innovative ideas. So we'll do that for, I think, looks like about 30 to 40 minutes, and then I'll ask Pradeep to come, and he's got some great experiences and thoughts and slides to share with us. And we would start that around 10:30, I think. Pradeep, is that your understanding as well? Great. So for now, we got about half an hour, and maybe let me just throw to Yuling first, since the other three guys had a chance to say a word of welcome. And Yuling, maybe you just list your top 3 things that you've seen in proposals, top 3 bits of advice that you would have for folks about how to express their ideas most clearly in a winning way. Okay, I'm not sure I have top 3, but I'll start talking and see how many come out. Yeah, and if it's the top 1, that's okay. We'll play it by ear.
Right. I think one of the most important things I see, or definitely write clearly, and so you can convey your ideas in as clear a way as possible. But I think the important thing, maybe the most important thing I think about when I write a grant, is that the audience who are going to be the reviewers, it could be the review panel sitting around the GCC table, or sometimes they send it out for external reviewers. They may not be the specialists in your area. Some of them are are in a broader area, maybe in a related area. So your pitch has to be done at multiple levels. So your pitch has to convince the intelligent scientist who is capable of judging critically what's good and what's bad, but they may not know the specifics, the very narrow, in-depth specifics of your particular project, your particular area. On the other hand, you also have to convince the specialists, because they may well be the external reviewers. The panel may send out for expert reviews in that very, very focused area. So you have to convince, so you have to give the broad context of why your work is important in a broader area, but you also have to convince the people who understands all the detailed methodologies, all the literature that you read, they've also read, and so you have to convince them what you're going to be doing is new and better than what already exists, and that it's going to work. So actually, I think this
Great, that's perfect.
Number 1, and I'll stop at that.
Okay, thanks, Yuling. So know your audience and write clearly. Michael, do you want to just pick up from there? What are the top 1, 2, or 3 bits of advice, things that you see that make good proposals go bad?
Well, I'll just pick up actually on Yuling's last point, and that is who is the audience. In the case of the GCC competitions, and perhaps from your own perspective, the number 1 audience, of course, will be the review panel. But GCC has a broader mandate, and that is to eventually be able to demonstrate that the work that they are supporting is actually impacting on people's lives in low and middle income countries. And so being able to draw the thread between your proposal idea and how that's actually going to make a difference on the ground on people's lives makes this particular proposal writing exercise more interesting, perhaps more challenging. But nonetheless, this is what GCC is setting out to do. And so I think the number one point that I would like to make is to be able to state your hypothesis very, very clearly in such a way that it draws out the linkage between the often very complex and very deep scientific explanation of the project itself, but how that translates into a hypothesis that is going to impact on people's lives. Certainly from our perspective at IDRC, and this is how we view proposals. We look very much at the formulation of a hypothesis in terms of a development problem. And here in this room, we all know that health and the lack of health is a development problem. So that part we can assume everybody is aware of. But how is it that your proposal is going to actually translate down onto the ground into a rural clinic in Botswana where there's an 18-year-old high school graduate managing the clinic? How is that going to help that individual treat her patients better? Tough job, but I'm really looking forward to your creative energies being applied to that difficult question.
Great advice, Michael. If I could just ask you one question that I'm sure is on the mind of many of our colleagues just before we throw to Pierre, which is, given the time frame of innovation and the immediacy on the one hand, and the immediacy of the needs that you described on the other hand, what's the best way, in your opinion, to tackle that in a proposal, recognizing that certainly in engineering-intensive proposals, the product is not going to be out there in 6 months, although the problem is clear and the pathway could be clear and the timeline could be clear. So could you give some advice on the issue of time frame in relationship to the immediacy of the needs vis-a-vis the time frame of innovation?
Well, absolutely. That is a critical question. And I think it really comes back to what you said, Peter, in terms of being able to set out the framework for your proposal. In other words, can you claim within the time that's available for you to carry out this work to actually be able to demonstrate an impact on people's lives? Probably not. These are time-limited proposals. But the thinking has to be there, and at least the conjecture and the hypothetical relationship between your work and the health of people, I think, needs to be brought out. So I'm not saying that you have to be able to generate the hard evidence that this is impacting on people's lives, but I would say you really have to construct your theory and your methodology around how it might and could do that.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Now, Pierre, you're actually the lead person in terms of the peer review of the diagnostics proposals, and you've participated in both, and you have a wealth of experience as a scientist yourself, as does Michael and Yuling. And so what advice would you have? What are the top 1, 2, or 3 mistakes, if we can use that word, that you see that make good proposals go bad? And what advice do you have for our colleagues?
So my comments will be directed at the exercise itself of writing a proposal. As you all know, it's an exercise in communication. And in communication, you want to be understood. And that's where we find the most common pitfall problem with applications. Is people seem to have a great idea, but don't seem to be able to communicate it properly. And so you need to write a good story. Everybody likes to read a good story. And so you need to engage your reviewer in wanting to read your story. So you got to step back from what you're doing, because you can get into, yes, the details are important, but it's the way that you're presenting them and when you're presenting them, just to make sure that your reader will understand. And one useful thing to do when you're writing your proposal is at one point, try to look at it from the outside. And one of the things I would do as a researcher writing proposals was to pick a reasonably intelligent person, which was my brother, and to give it to him to read. And if he can follow, then I knew I was in trouble. The other element that I would really urge you to consider is that every idea has got pitfalls. Okay, things that you're not exactly sure how you're going to be addressing. You need to make sure that you make them very clear. Don't try to hide them. Peers are trained hound dogs that will find them. And they will be bringing them out. So you're much better to bring them out yourself and to say, okay, this is an issue, and to, as clearly as possible, explain how you will try to address this, or find help to address these issues.
Great, thank you. And Pierre, your brother's email address for the colleagues is? I should have mentioned, obviously, what we're doing in this first session is generic discussion of proposals, and then very soon we'll get into the two specific programs. And of course, the main goal of these few days is learning by doing. You'll get a lot more from working on your proposals than any of these general things, but these general things are also important. So you see the logic of progression in the program. Steve, you've just told me that you shipped off, I think, 800 pounds of proposals that you reviewed. I don't know for what program, but that's obviously an experienced reviewer, and it's probably helped your strength training as well, the 800 pounds. What mistakes do you see? What errors do you see? What advice do you have for our colleagues that make good proposals go bad, and how can they keep them good?
Sure. So let me try a couple comments that maybe add to the three sets of excellent comments that you've already had. Thank you, Peter. First, I'd remind you that all of you sitting here are actually a astonishingly elite group. Whether it is the diagnostics RFP that you've competed in, and you were picked as the top 8, 9, 10%, or GCE Phase 1 winners where you are the top 0.5% or 0.25%. So you've already, in some sense, tremendously distinguished yourself against a global field of competition. And so, you know, taking the next step is challenging. For me, it seems or feels a little presumptuous to give you advice because it's been a very long time since I've actually won a proposal award. But I have actually reviewed a lot of proposals over the last 10 or 15 years. And I would keep one thing in mind. So proposal reviewers typically are reasonably up to date on the literature. And as some of the others have noted, the review is structured that there is usually outstanding peers who are deep in the literature as external reviewers. But the other thing that you have as a tool as you do proposals or reviews is all the other proposals. And so in some sense you have a fresh landscape of ideas in an area, and in some sense that really forms the basis on how one thinks or looks at proposals. It's also important to note that both for the Gates Foundation and I believe also for Grand Challenges Canada, the types of proposals that we seek are not exclusively about pushing forward the frontiers of knowledge or identifying the best science, but they're actually addressed at identifying great ideas to solve problems. And so that's really critical. It's a different type of review than a truly traditional academic review. And so to that end, when we read proposals, it is typically a kind of a structured panel where there are peers who are truly outstanding in the specific fields. But the final say is actually typically with the program people who are looking at the proposals as a portfolio and trying to understand how and what they deliver for solving the problems that are defined in the RFPs. So that, and it's incredibly important not to think about what your ideas are and what you'd like to do, but to make it crystal clear what it is that you're delivering that actually contributes to the problem that's defined in those solicitations. I'd be the first to admit what an incredibly imperfect process it is to write those solicitations. And so there is a lack of clarity in that. That's not by design. It's in some sense a weakness of the other side. They're difficult to write. I'd also echo the comment that, you know, it's probably the most important thing is what is it you're delivering. To that end, we're not willing to take a risk on something that isn't necessarily going to deliver towards the goal, but we have a tremendous appetite or capacity to take risks on science. But following up with what Pierre said is that the review panels are very good at, you know, identifying holes. And so the more upfront and honest you are of identifying what you feel are the risks, in some sense, the more favorably the proposals are reviewed. So just in closing, it's really about what is it you're delivering to the problem that's defined, and then it's not an issue with regards to funding risky work, but it's an issue with regards to demonstrating to the reviewers that you understand the risks that are involved in your work that you're proposing, and at least have some plan that leaves reviewers thinking that you might be able to solve those problems.
Great. So there's some terrific opening statements. And just responding to Steve, I would say very core to our philosophy in Grand Challenges Canada is that innovation saves lives. And if that's core to your philosophy, then you are very interested in solutions. And those solutions do need to have impact on important developmental problems. And this was Michael's point. And so I think you're seeing a lot of synergy across. This isn't necessarily about the latest paper in science. This is about creating knowledge that can be applied in a solution that can help health in the developing world. I'm just going to ask a couple of more quick comments and then open up to the audience for your questions for the panel. But Pierre, I did want to just go back to you for a second because you often emphasize the importance of selection criteria and of the criteria in the RFP itself in the process. And I know in the review process you come back to that over and over again. So as we're giving general advice and so on, we should revenir à nos moutons and just highlight the importance of the actual criteria in the RFP itself. And could you say a little bit about how that plays out in the review and just expand on that point that you often make so wisely?
Okay, so obviously the peers are asked to review your proposal along the lines of certain criteria that are there to capture the objectives and the outcomes that we're wanting to have from the initiatives. So it is very important that you look at the criteria and that you understand very clearly that what these criteria are and that you're going to be addressing them specifically in your proposal, because we will at every peer review through every peer review process from the start, when we engage the reviewers in looking at your proposal, we remind them they have to evaluate them according to these criteria. Now, these are not necessarily weighted criteria, so it's good and it's bad. Good because actually their importance will vary sometimes depending on the type of proposals, and we'll leave the room to the peers to evaluate what that importance should be. The bad part about it, though, is that actually, if you are not addressing to the satisfaction of the peers one of the criteria, it might be sufficient for him to consider that your proposal is not worthy of support. And so, again, would encourage you very strongly to read these criteria, to be asking questions about them to the people here that are in the program delivery responsibilities, and to address them in your proposal.
Okay, merci Pierre. Now, you know, the importance of clear communication came up in many of the responses. Jocelyn Clark, as she mentioned, is a senior editor at PLOS Medicine, which is a world-class open access peer review medicine and science journal. And a lot of those same skills of clear communication that you would use in sharpening a manuscript are the same that you might use in sharpening the story in a grant. So I just wanted to ask Jocelyn to talk to us for 30 or 60 seconds about what her top 1 or 2 or 3 things advice is with respect to clear communication, just playing off the panel. Jocelyn will also talk more tomorrow about this, but I wanted to set the marker down since it came up so prominently, just as an appetizer. So Jocelyn, in a minute, what are the top 3 things you'd advise?
Sure, thanks, Peter. And as he said, I'm here most of today and all of tomorrow to help with messaging as much as possible. The comments that come to my head as we're talking resonate a lot with what Yulin and Pierre have both said. I mean, first, in terms of clear communication, we need to be thinking about ways that we can, in a nutshell, communicate what our objective is, such that a generalist can understand. So a couple of tools that I always advocate that you may be interested in are one, what I call the sort of pub test or the bus test, such that if somebody's sitting beside you on the bus or indeed maybe at a table around here or on the airplane and they ask you, what is it that you're working on, or what's your project for the Gates Foundation working on, that you can say in 1 or 2 sentences very succinctly what it is exactly you're doing. And the reason that that tool is so important is that a lot of our writing fails when we haven't established up front what it is that we're trying to say. What the point of our research is something that we ought to be doing in our heads before we commit it to page. And I think that that's, you know, one of the best pieces of advice that I can give. The second, which goes to Pierre's point, is to give yourself a soft deadline. So if your proposal is due to us, let's say at the end of December, that you give yourself till December 15th to finish your proposal, such that you can send it around to peers for their comments. Or you could give yourself a bit of a break from the proposal, return to it after a week with fresh eyes, perhaps with a little bit more attuned to that background context that Pierre was suggesting. These are the sorts of things that I advise people when they're writing manuscripts to submit to a journal where, you know, you're selecting 5% of what is submitted to you because of competition for space. I mean, you've obviously come through your first big hurdle, but the competition will continue. So putting your best foot forward is often best achieved by that very, very clear messaging. Give yourself some time and give yourself that pub or that bus test.
Great. So, Pierre, I guess the question I should have asked you is, what pub does your brother go to? And so let's now open up for questions from colleagues for Yuling, for Michael, for Pierre, for Steve, for anyone else. What you know, as I think Steve emphasized, but all the folks emphasized, you're all very experienced proposal writers. So that was really just to get started. But perhaps in writing proposals, there have been things that you've been wondering about different approaches, about different questions. And you really should feel free to share, because we're not taking notes of who's saying what here and influencing the peer review process. In fact, they don't even let me in the room, just as an example, which is lucky. But the you know, what you'll be judged on will be what will be on the page subsequently. So this is the time to feel comfortable, open up a little bit in the highlighting risks mode that was mentioned. And we surely have struggled with issues. You surely have questions related to proposal writing generally. And then we'll come to the specifics of the diagnostics, of the grand challenge explorations, of your proposals subsequently. But do you have any questions, any comments at this point? You're also very experienced proposal writers. You may have wisdom that you'd like to share with your colleagues as well. Any questions or comments? Yes, please.
Well, the first thing, the guidelines which you sent and which were posted in the website were very, very helpful for us to develop the proposal, because otherwise we'd write in a conventional way and probably it would be rejected. So I'd like to thank all of you for the very lucid and concise proposal, the guidelines which you have given. And another point I'd like in this to ask about this second phase. There was a point in the project potential. Does the proposed work achieve proof of principle for the original idea? That part is not very clear. So if anyone could elaborate a bit on that, it would be very helpful.
So I think this is the Grand Challenge Exploration Phase 2. Phase 2, Round 3. Bar 7, yeah, so we use the, phase 2 means going from the proof of concept to the, have I got that right? Going from the proof of concept to the $1 million grant, to take it a little bit more to scale. This is on the Grand Challenge Exploration side. And Steve, I I guess the question is, what does proof of concept mean, really? And do you want to address this now, or a little bit now and more later when we talk about the specific program? But it is a common term. It's useful generically, maybe just to touch upon it now. So proof of concept, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah, so let me just say a couple words, and then I think it might be more useful to defer a longer discussion in the context of each of the
Perfect, thank you.
But, and maybe this won't be helpful, but it's really yours to define, right? You need to define the idea, and in some sense, particularly for the Grand Challenge explorations, we've prescribed the amount of funding. And so you need to decide what would be the milestone or the mark that you think you can achieve that would really move forward your idea. And so it's not getting into phase 1 clinical trial, but it is that point that would be compelling to demonstrate progress in your idea that would then be further compelling to continued funding.
Great. Other questions or comments? Yes, please.
Yes, can we account the reviewers will carefully read the whole proposal before, I know the executive summary is important, and probably we need to use that to get the attention from the reviewers. But the full story has to be told in the main content. So that's my question. Can we tell the full story according to the logic and to the structure, and we count that the reviewers will read it?
Great. So Pierre, that sounds like a question for you. Will the reviewers read the proposals?
So, of course, it will have to be within the limit of pages you're given, but absolutely they will read the full story. And the reason why they will read the full story, if for nothing else, is that somebody else also, there's a number of people that are tasked with reading your proposal. So you wouldn't want to look foolish in front of your other experts and say, and have to recognize that you haven't fully read the proposal. And I've seen quite a number of times that one reviewer saying to the other, that's not what was said at page 12, paragraph 2, line 3, without looking at it. So it's kind of a contest between themselves too, that they know exactly what is presented. And actually, they have to defend their own opinion because we reach a consensus around a table. These are all experts. And if somebody is not good enough peer, he will find out very quickly from his peers that they're not satisfied with his work. But seriously, no, people are really, you'd be surprised, or maybe not, to say that they actually get engaged very almost emotionally with the proposals. And they're going to be, that's why I was telling about, make sure they understand, engage them. An interesting story. Actually, they'll be the best proponents of your proposal. They'll fight it out with the others to say, no, this is the best one.
And that's actually why they're called peer reviewers, not because they're your peers, because innovators have no peers, but they're peers of each other, and they got to prove themselves to each other. So there you go. Allison and Ling, I just wonder if you have anything you want to add at this point on the reviewer fatigue question, or anything that you've heard that you want to comment on, or I can come back to you later. Anything you want to?
Very, very small comment, just add to Pierre's. If you don't stick to the page limits, you actually end up penalizing yourself, because as Carly and I saw, if there were extra pages, we just remove them. So it's very bureaucratic, but it's something that can actually really hurt you if you don't listen to those rules.
Great, terrific. Ling, anything you want to add at this point?
I think the other component which you're hearing a lot of is the succinctness of the idea, and how you sell that point is the critical piece. That we will read through the entire document, but that first concept, it's got to be pretty far up in the front to kind of hook the reviewer in to understand and to be engaged in the proposal. So the earlier forward you put that, the better.
Excellent, thank you. And Ling, you want to add?
Just a small comment to add. In addition to having that hook early on, if you make a mistake early on, then the reviewer may not want to read the rest of it. You can lose your credibility pretty fast.
Great. Boy, we're really sparking now. Go ahead, Pierre.
No, so why is it that we're going to be sticking very strictly to the instructions, what you've been told, where the page limits and the font and what else have you? because we need to be fair to everybody. And this is extremely important for us. So that's why we say stick to the same rules. We will make sure that you will not have more pages, you will not have any advantage over the others based on the fact that you're trying to present more material or what have you. So read these instructions very clearly. It is very important for us, and it's not because we're bureaucratic, it's because we need to be fair. And the only way to be fair is to make sure that everybody has the same chance of making their story.
Excellent, thank you. Please.
If I could just ask, what is the role, do you think, for integrating with other collaborative partners? Or is the emphasis largely on rather a tighter, cohesive working group? Or should we be demonstrating collaboration with other partners in other countries, as an example?
That's a good question. Who wants to tackle that? Michael, do you want to take a first crack, and then...
Well, I think that's an excellent question, and it just so happens that the main modality that IDRC uses in funding its researchers is through a network of linked individuals across regions. So I don't know whether it's going to play specifically into the competitions that we're dealing with here now, but there certainly are aspects of a network approach, including resilience and leveraging of expertise and so on, that have advantages. But I'll let others speak to the actual specifics.
Pierre?
Well, it goes to 2 points, in my view, in terms just purely of the application. It goes to feasibility. Is that a part of your feasibility? Will you be more convincing that it's feasible because of these partners? So so it goes to the feasibility. And then very importantly, it goes to impact. Will you achieve your goals? What impact will it have? Well, a lot of times, partnership plays a very significant role in having more impact.
Excellent. Steve, are you going to comment?
Sure, I'll just make 2 quick comments. So from my perspective, one of the value adds that we do as an organization in managing grants is actually build in collaboration as we go. And so in some sense, in most of the initiatives that you see, particularly the diagnostics, which I know you're interested in, that's all about collaboration once the projects are underway. The collaborations and the work that you propose, there's not a benefit to that in and of itself as an intrinsic thing. And so it's really key is that collaboration necessary for the thing that you're proposing to do?
Great, thank you. And let me just see a show of hands about who has questions still so I can manage the time accordingly. 1, 2, okay, perfect. So we're really good. Deepak, over to you.
I just had a comment. I attended a conference call on September 15th and organized by the Gates Foundation, and this was for the Grand Challenges Phase 2 applicants, and I think that's, well, hopefully it should probably hold for Grand Challenges Canada as well. The point was that the Phase 1 grant application was reviewed by one reviewer, and as well as the program component in the Gates Foundation, and that our Phase 2 application will definitely be reviewed by the same reviewer, probably in addition another review panel. I think that's the understanding I got. And but the important thing was that the Phase 2 application must be in sync with the goals of the foundation in terms of what their global health objectives particularly are. And one comment was that most of the grants which are not funded are basically out of sync and not in line with the foundation's. So basically just a few comments from that.
Steve, do you want to just start with that, and then Pierre maybe tackle that from our standpoint at Grand Challenges?
Yeah, so you're speaking specifically about GCE, Grand Challenge Exploration. So the Phase 1 awards are typically reviewed by 4 innovation reviewers, and they must be picked by at least one of them. Some are picked by multiple. And those are picked aligned to the topics, which are broadly aligned to our strategies, but picked solely on the initiative of that reviewer. And so that reviewer, he or she is selected for innovation. When we come back for the Phase 2 awards, we are reviewing them for both the innovation, the quality of the science, but at that point we're getting ready to invest up to $1 million. And those works need to be aligned to the strategic goals that the Gates Foundation has, at least for us. And it's an imperfect thing, unfortunately. The best information we can provide you for that is the strategy write-ups that are on our website.
And maybe, Pierre, I'll just kick off. So I think this was implicit, but just to make it explicit. So with respect to the Grand Challenge explorations, Grand Challenges Canada and the Gates Foundation have an agreement that we will, A, work together focused on low and middle income country investigators to build capacity in proposal writing, and that's what we're doing here. And B, we will work together to co-fund the actual Grand Challenge Explorations Phase 1 when they reach, if and when they reach Phase 2. So that's the relationship between Grand Challenges Canada and the Gates Foundation with regard to the Grand Challenge Explorations. Obviously, we start with the ones that they propose. And then on an experimental basis, we may also reflect on the ones that are truly excellent and outstanding, but outside the specific strategic programmatic goals of the Gates Foundation. That latter piece is experimental at this moment. It depends a bit on the volume of traffic and the funds available, et cetera. But that's what you see when you've got two independent organizations working towards a common goal with 80% overlap, where maybe 20% doesn't overlap based on strategic considerations of both of the organizations. So that's to be continued and something to be developed, but I thought it was important just to bring some clarity to that relationship at this time. Michael or Pierre, anything else you want to say about that?
Well, not about that, but it might be useful for you to understand a bit more how the process for the point of care diagnostic,
yes,
how the peer review is done. Is that we assign each application, typically, we assign each application to two peers within a panel that have to make a full report on these applications, plus usually what we call a reader, just to have a third person that will have read it completely and prepared for it at the time of the meeting face-to-face of the peers, but the reader will not have to write a full report. And at the time that the panel gets together, both of the assigned peers have to present their full report and make all the points about what are the strengths and weaknesses, and to engage a discussion. The reader will add to this if all the points are not covered, and then the full panel is engaged in a discussion about the value of the proposal, and at the end they need to reach a consensus. Usually the way we work to reach a consensus is to assign it when we do get to a point of consensus, is to score that proposal, to give it a numerical score. At the end of the day, the only importance of that score is that it will lead you to a ranking, because it's the ranking that will make, that is the most important factor at the end of the day. Where did your proposal rank as compared to the other? There's obviously the score will have an impact on where you rank, but the real important factor is the ranking, and the peers it is made clear to the peers that they need to be very careful about that ranking and establish a difference between number 1 and number 3 and number 3 and number 10.
Great, thank you. And I think we have 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up maybe with a last word to our esteemed panel.
I would really like to congratulate and thank you for having this as the first session, because we were asked to make a draft, and we were making draft. Things were not very clear. What is going to be the main thing? Now, in the morning you said impact. So we were not sure how much stress is going to be on the impact. I'm very glad that this has been brought, that it is diagnostic with impact. That's probably more important. But my request now is, as we go back tomorrow, before that, let us know how much is going to be the contribution of funds for which area, so that when we make a project, we don't waste your resources, we don't waste our energy, and we really do what we wish to do. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And just, I'll take both questions and then we'll get some responses. Just a matter of clarification, funds for both area, you mean the grant size, the total envelope, or something else?
See, when you're talking of diagnostics, see, the diagnosis will take some funds. You will have to have personnel, the kits and everything. But when you want to see the impact, it's the therapy and what happens. So it's therapy sometimes. Suppose you make a diagnosis and you then treat the disease. And then you treat the disease, you see the effect. So say something now, it may be anything. So if you want to see the impact, somebody said that it will take years. But some impact definitely is visible in a particular duration. Okay, you have achieved this. So for that, how much is going to be the stress in the project? Thank you.
Oh, great. So that's really a question of allocation of resources in the proposal relative to the goals of the proposal, and it's a diagnostic-specific question. So when we get into the diagnostics program, we should put down a marker and come back to that, because I think it's very important for people to understand the logic of the plug-and-play diagnostics. There's many different approaches one could take to diagnostics and even to point-of-care diagnostics. And I think the clearer we can be about the specific approach that's been taken in the request for proposals under consideration here, the original one from the Gates Foundation, which was up to $30 million, which is moving through geographically neutral, and then our subsequent proposal for up to $12 million, which focused on low and middle income country investigators, plus or minus some possible Canadian partnerships. I think the logic of that $42 million investment in point-of-care diagnostics, and by the way, we do think about it as a single $42 million investment with a single community of innovators who are learning from each other, where the Grand Challenges Canada role has been to enrich that community with low and middle income, will have been to enrich that community with low and middle income country investigators. The logic of that approach to point-of-care diagnostics is going to be really critical and relevant to your question, and we should come back to it when we talk about diagnostics specifically. Let's get your question on the table, closing comments from panelists, and then over to Pradeep after that.
Thank you. My question is related to the structure of the applications. Usually what we do when you write the proposal, we put the background, then hypothesis, objectives, specific aims, then the study design, etc. But here the plan is a little bit different in the template. So this is important if we follow the usually what we do, or we have to do in the same way as it is shown in the template.
So this is a GCE Phase 2 specific question. Do you follow the instructions in the template? Do you want Ling to handle that, Steve? And then we go from, and then we'll, or maybe you have a question of clarification.
So actually, that's a great question. Part of it is actually Pradeep is going to share with you his Phase 2 proposal and how he structured it. I think, structure is one component of, I don't think we have a preference of which way you must structure it. I think it's more important of how clear you're able to communicate your idea up front. However form you want to take, I think is fine, but you must address all of those criteria through the document. The key thing is engages up front, though.
Great. So we're almost on time because I took Carly's admonition seriously and caught up on some time. I always do what I'm told. And I just want to see a show of hands. Are there others who would have liked to have asked something in this session that didn't have a chance? Just raise your hand if there are. Okay, great. So we exhausted the sort of generic level questions, and where we'll be heading next is a concrete example of a proposal in a second after this round of final comments. This is on the See One, Do One, Teach One plan that we are here, and we're about to see from Pradeep, and I'll introduce him in a second, a successful Phase 2 proposal and a model that can serve for us. But before I do that, I just wanted to go back to our panel. And you've heard a lot of questions, a lot of back and forth from your colleagues. Is there anything that you'd like to emphasize at the end in terms of advice to help optimize the chance of success of these colleagues in these competitions?
Well, definitely know your audience and know what the program is looking for.
Great. Thank you.
Well, I would say that if this workshop is going to be a success, and I'm sure it is, you're going to make life very, very difficult for the peer reviewers, and that should be your goal, is to give them a very, very hard time in the review of your proposals, because they're all going to come in at top quality. And so, Pierre, I'm sorry to let you know this, but you know, life is going to be hell, and you're going to hear from these people. So that should be your objective.
Great. Pierre?
Well, just say be bold. That's the reason why you're here in the first place, because that's what appealed to the reviewers.
So I'll just reiterate two things. I think the most important thing, at least for me as a reviewer, is clarity of what you're contributing to the thing that we're trying to solve. And then I really like Jocelyn's comment. Many proposals definitely read like they were finished a few short minutes before they were submitted. The opportunity to set a soft deadline and read what you've written before somebody else does is tremendously useful.
Great. So I'd like you to give a warm round of applause to our panel here.